which is bakoil. So we started leading into the idea of what is the yisrin in the audits, what is the advantage and growth in the audits. So first he introduces that though Malchus is the lowest of all the spheres, still in all, in Malchus, which is the lowest of all the spheres, is revealed, or it's connected, or it's empowered through it, the power of the Ein Sof to be able to create Yesh Me'ayin. And therefore, it is also counted and called Keser when counting the spheres from below to above. Not just because it's a Keser, Malchus is considered like a Keser to the levels beneath it, to the worlds of beyond, but also it's considered like a Keser even in comparison to the spheres that are higher than it, because of its connection with the Ein Sof. So we left off at line 18 in the second page of the Maimer. V'zel mashakosov Yisrin Goymer Melch L'Sodom Nevad. It says this is the advantage and increase of the field, and for the sake of the king, we do the work in the field. Like it's brought down the Medrash, yes, Yisrin La'aretz. There is such an advantage to the land. Sha'afilu hamelech shoyel avadis ara iloy avadis ara. The king is above and beyond everything, definitely beyond something as mundane and as low as a field. Still in all, the king asks, did the earth give forth its produce? Did it produce or did it not produce? Meaning that there's a special advantage of the field. There's an advantage of the level of the earth that we said before. The level of earth corresponds to spheres of Malchus, even in regards and in comparison to the midas above Malchus that are called Melech. Often we have the midas and Malchus referred to as Melech and Matronisa, the king and his escort or his queen and so on. So on the one hand, the Zeir Ampin is called the king. On the other hand, the Aretz, Malchus is just the level of Aretz. Still in all, Malchus has an advantage over the level of the Midas, over the level of Zeir Ampin, that's called Melech. Like this idea and the advantage of the earth is expressed also in the literal meaning, in the simple meaning of the land, like it's explained in the Igeres HaKodesh, Siman Chav, that we mentioned before, entitled Ivich Yoyichad, specifically in the land, in the physical earth. It has in it the capability to cause to grow grasses, trees, and fruits. From Tamid are constantly growing it, constantly making it ayin liyesh. It is pointed out that initially at the beginning of creation, there were other things that were created ayin liyesh, but and some things came out from the ground, like it says that the land gave forth the animals, etc. But as far as vegetation and the trees and fruits, that's constantly yesh me'ayin, because even though the Aretz is lower than Shemayim, lower than anything else, still in all, specifically in this lowest level, is embedded the highest. Just like in Malchus is embedded the Ein Sof, so the Malchus also functions like the Aretz and creates yesh me'ayin. In the order of the levels of the inanimate things, the vegetation, living animals, and human beings, though living animals are higher than vegetation, and human beings are higher than animals, so therefore one would think that the higher the thing is, the less it needs that which is on a lower rung. But it's not that way. Afal Pikein still in all, Achain Nizoin V'chaim Atzameach. Animals are sustained and they live from vegetation. V'amedaber Kabel Chayusim Mishneim. And a human being receives its vitality from both animals and vegetation. And how is that? That's because the root of the inanimate earth is higher than the human being. That therefore the person needs to lower himself to vegetation and animals. They eat from them because the vegetation grows from the earth. And that's how the human being receives his sustenance from the earth, via the vegetation that grows from the earth, and via the animals that eat the vegetation that grows from the earth. Especially. Another idea and aspect of this descent is that the entire idea of needing to eat is one of those things that a person is likened to an animal. The Chazal say that there are things in which a person is likened to a malach, similar to a malach, and there are things that a person is likened to similar to an animal. So when it comes to eating, he's likened to an animal. And what do we know is the nature of an animal, the ruach habehema yeredesi lamata, that the spirit of an animal is what descends below. So therefore, being that this is the animal part of the person that needs to eat, if you will, so it gives him the animal tendency to go lower, and therefore the person needs to descend and lower himself to receive his kedei lekabel chayusay, to be able to receive his vitality and life. And this is all because the earth and the aretz has in it something more powerful than the chai, than the tzemeach, than the medaber, that they all need to come onto it. This is all to be able to understand the idea of aretz beruchnis. Hamalchus has a greater shayrish. So now the Rebbe is going to bring this in avodas Hashem. What is that in a person's service? What's considered the aretz that is advantageous and greater yisrein la'aretz, that there's the advantage in the aretz. So he says in line 11, Vinyana beruchnis b'avodas Adam hu in kiyum hamitzvos. The idea of aretz in the spiritual component of the service of a person to Hashem is the idea of fulfilling mitzvahs. Like it's explained in Torah at the beginning, on the pasuk it says, "Hashemayim kisi va'aretz hadoim ragli," that the heavens are my throne and the earth is the my footstool, of which I place my feet upon. So he says, Shemayim, so the Rebbe in Torah explains, Shemayim hu inyan Torah, the level of the heavens is the idea of Torah. The Eretz hu inyan ha-mitzvahs. Earth is the level of mitzvahs. Like we've had many different mamorim, that idea of Torah is min ha-shemayim dibarti mochim, Torah is from heaven, mitzvahs is about taking earthly things and elevating them. So he says, "V'yesh yisron ma'mayla bekim ha-mitzvahs eretz l'gabel limud ha-Torah." There is a greater quality and advantage in the fulfillment of mitzvahs, which are called eretz, over Torah study. K'maimer ha-Mishnah, like the Mishnah states, ha-ma'aseh hu ha'ikar, action is what's primary. So even though Torah is higher, Torah is likened to heaven, and mitzvahs is only like the earth, still in all, the primary thing, ha-ma'aseh hu ha'ikar. And also the Chazal said, Kadol Talmud Shemevadei Maisa, the greatness of Torah studies that it brings to action. So again, we see the Chol Milos HaTalmud, the entire advantage and quality of study, of learning Torah, is Shemevil Maisa Dafka, is the fact that it brings to action. So we see again the advantage of action, of mitzvahs, of aretz, over Shamayim, over Torah. Now the Rebbe says that in Torah learning itself, there is the Maisa aspect of Torah learning. He says in the brackets, "V'limud Torah atzmoi Inyan ha'maisa hu inyan ha'iyun v'ayigir b'Torah. And in Torah study itself, the idea of action is the idea of going into depth and toiling in Torah, because then that's the idea. Maisa means a matter of both coercion and it's a heavy work and so on. That is the level of Torah which is greater than the Torah itself that comes from Shemayim. The toil that I put into Torah is the action of Torah, which is greater than the Talmud itself. That's only Mevil de Mais. So he says in line 21, this is also what the Chazal say, someone that says, all I have is Torah, that's all I need, Torah study. So then he doesn't even have Torah. Is Torah, there has to be both Torah study and doing acts of kindness. The idea of doing acts of kindness, the simple meaning behind it is that their Gmilas Chasadim applies when there is a needy person. If there's no needy people, then there's no point, there's no possibility of doing Gmilas Chasadim. Just like in the physical sense, in the simple sense of Gmilas Chasadim, that where does Gmilas Chesed apply? It's only by the needy. So in a similar vein, when it comes to the inner understanding of what Gmilas Chasadim represents in our avodah, who klolos ha-mitzvahs, it's also the general idea of mitzvahs, because the general idea of mitzvahs is also about the drawing down and being hamshachim lamata of the divine light into the physical world. The physical world is similar to being something that's needy. It doesn't have this divine light and energy. And when I do a mitzvah, I'm doing a chesed, I'm being mamshech this light into this world. So that's what it means. That someone that says, all I have is Torah, so even Torah he doesn't have, rather he needs Torah and Gmilas Chasadim, meaning he needs Torah and mitzvahs, because mitzvahs is the level of Aretz. Even though it's lower, it has an advantage over the Torah. To such degree that even someone that Torah is his profession, then in general, since Torah is his profession, he is released from certain obligations. For example, the Rashbi did not have to daven, did not have an obligation of the mitzvah of tefillah. I'm not talking about Kriya Shema. The mitzvah of tefillah, he was not obligated. Still in all, despite the fact that he's such a high level of Torah study that is called Torosium Nasi, in a bevoy mitzvah maisius, when a mitzvah of action comes to him, that it's impossible for someone else to do it for whatever reason. Either there's no one else that can actually do it, or that's a mitzvah that's incumbent upon the person himself, like lulav and esrog and so on. So he says, top of page ches, he needs to stop Torah study and fulfill the mitzvah. Like it's brought down the Yerushalmi concerning the Rashbi, that Torah was his profession. So the Yerushalmi asks, does not Rab Shimon hold that a person will stop from his Torah study to shake the lulav and esrog? Meaning as follows: after the discussion, if a person stops Torah study or not, the conclusion of the Yerushalmi is it's really a great wonder. How could it even be a havamina? How could it be even a consideration that he will not stop for doing the mitzvah of lulav? So the question is, why is it such a puzzle? Why is it such a wonder? Why is it like something that he finds so surprising? All of this, the reason why the Gemara takes it as a given that there must be stopping to do a mitzvah from learning Torah. It's because the great quality of action. Like he concludes in the Geras HaKodesh Siman Chof that we mentioned before, that it's the knowledge for someone that's understanding is easy to understand. Through all the matters that are mentioned earlier in that Geras HaKodesh, the Alter Rebbe concludes the whole entire Geras HaKodesh by saying, now we can understand, any understanding person can appreciate the great advantage and quality of mitzvahs and actions. That's the main point of this letter of the Alter Rebbe in the Geras HaKodesh, to communicate that idea. So this is the concept of Oretz that has the great quality over the levels higher than Oretz. In a person's service, the advantage of mitzvahs over Torah learning. So now the Rebbe is going to add another component to it. Where is this advantage come about? How does, let's say, Malchus get this advantage? And how do mitzvahs get this advantage? It receives it from something else. Ois Gimel, line 13. Amnam Yisuna Oretz Bakoilu. The advantage and the increase in the land is in Koil. Vahainum Shayisrin Ba'oretz Waide Bakoil. This advantage, this increase, this special quality that the land has, it's through Koil Shu Inyan Sfiras HaYisoid. Koil, we know, is the Sfira of Yisoid. Like we have every morning in davening, we say L'cha Hashem Hagdulo, which goes on the Sfira of Chesed, Hagvura, Vatferes, Vanetzach, Vahoid, Ki Koil Bashamayim V'oretz, L'cha Hashem Amlocha. So Ki Koil Bashamayim V'oretz, Chassidus explains, it's the level that joins heavens and earth. We said before, earth is the level of Malchus. The spheres above Malchus are called Shamayim, heavens. Ki Koil Bashamayim V'oretz, the Friedrich Rebbe brings down the Basilagani, it's the Ochid Shamayim V'ara, it's the part that joins the heavens and earth. So it's going on the sphere of Yisoid. Shedavka Idei Ashpos HaYisoid, Nasa Yisra Malchus, only specifically through the influence and the flow that comes down from Yisoid. That's what creates the increase in Malchus, that now Malchus is higher than the spheres prior to it. In a similar vein, like in Torah mitzvahs, in Torah mitzvahs, Shegodl Talmud, maybe they might say the greatness of Torah studies that brings to action. Shapirish Bezekib Shutihu, the simple meaning of this is Sheketei Leid Amatz Tzarech Lasis, to be able to know what's necessary to do, the Eich Tzarech Lasis, and how one has to do it. That the actions should be the way it should be, that the action should be appropriate. What ensures, in other words, that we do the mitzvah correctly, not incorrectly. That's through Torah study. That's in the simple sense that Torah influences the mitzvahs and assures that the mitzvahs should be in that great level that they're even greater than Torah. But without Torah, you're not going to know what to do the mitzvahs. That is in the simple sense. Line 21, in the inner meaning of it, what does it mean? That Torah is the one that enables and empowers the mitzvahs to have this high level. It's because concerning the Torah says, behold my words. Meaning, it's Hashem's words, it's Hashu Inyan Hamshachem Omaylo. Torah is something that is a revelation, what's drawn down from above to below. Mitzvahs in Yonam Halom Matal Mailo, and the mitzvahs is taking the world and the physical items in the world and elevating them from below to above. So when you have these two operations, if you will, you have Amshacha of godliness coming down below, and then you have an elevation of the below to godliness. So how does this proceed? What is the order of it? So he says, and the order in this is So there should be able to be the elevation, ascent from below to above. There has to initially be what draws down from above to below. In other words, this is many times Chassidus brings it down, every halah from above, below to above, needs to be preceded by Hamshacha from above to below. This is why also before the service of the one down here below, an inspiration down here below, there first has to be an empowerment from above in a way of an inspiration from above that awakens us. That by the power of the inspiration from above, it is able to be the inspiration from below. Similar to where it says, go out, my beloved, towards the kala. The chosen has to go out towards the kala. The chosen is the mashpia, and the kala is the makabel. And the avodah of the mashpia is to draw down from above to below, and the makabel is to rise up from below to above. So the lachod doidi shuyin ha'aram al maila, that's the ray from above. And through that ray from above, kadesha pnei Shabbos nakabla, so there should be able to be the level of the face of the Shabbos we will receive. In other words, the elevation from below to above needs to be preceded by the hamshacha from above to below. That's why it says the advantage of the earth, the growth of the earth, the mile of the earth, of the below is only bakoil. Initially, there has to be drawn down from the level of Yisoid. And then, once we have that revelation of bakoil, the level of Yisoid, so then afterwards becomes an advantage in Malchus, which is the level of the land, also in comparison to Yisoid. It's not just that now Malchus is greater than something else. Even it's greater than the source that it received from, which is the level of Sfiras HaYisoid. Top of the next page, page Tes. So that there should be able to be the empowerment from above. That the empowerment from above, this Rustal Eila enables, that there should be the service from us down here below. The above needs to constrict and to lower himself to descend below. This is also what it says, so he's going to explain the meaning of this pasuk. Tirgalti melashon raglayim. The word tirgalti is from the word legs. So in other words, I had the level of legs, in other words, descent to Ephraim. Ephraim is another term of endearment that Hashem calls Klal Yisrael. And then kochem al zroisov. That shezeu in nashpolo lamata ad mechinas raglayim. It's a lowering down below till the level of the legs. Valzen damar concerning this it says vanoichi tirgalti. I was a level of the legs. Hainu shakodesh baruch hu tzorach letzamtzim es atzmeichulu. That Hashem needs to constrict himself and constrain himself. Like the Mizrach Magid writes in his Likutei Torah, the Torah at the beginning, this is a metaphor like a father that constricts himself for his son. Why does he lower himself? Literally, he lowers himself physically. He lowers himself to elevate, to raise up the son. So that's the idea of taking him on his arms. So first he has to descend and pick up the child and put him on his arms. That's the idea of Yisrustul Eila that evokes and causes the Yisrustul Satam. To such a degree that the elevation is so high that they raise up their hands to holiness, and they even make a bracha, the amshacha, into Shem Havaya. that even the level of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, even the level of the Spheres, are now able, because of the uplifting that happened, the descent that happened before, to rise up so high and bring Am Shachi even to the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei.